And then it starts becoming a free-for-all, because then the purchasing now will use other manufacturers partners, because that was your early instruction to them. And before you know it, you got all these partners that don't make any sense. And they're also this partner and that partner. So when that purchasing person leaves you, you don't know what to do anymore.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our #1 priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. If you're a warehouse manager, your goal will be to get as many shipments out of the door as fast as possible. You might also be tempted to compare your ratios with other similar warehouses or the warehouses of your competitors. But as each business is different, each warehouse and its ratios will be different as well. So while you need to consider the warehouses and inventory as part of your continuous improvement plan, as you learn more about your business and processes, you can't compare them with anyone else. In today's episode, our guest, Jeff Lamb, shares his insights on optimizing dock to stock ratios of a warehouse. He also discusses the various components of the dock to stock ratio that drives the overall ratio, including time to receive the product against a purchase order and put away in the suitable locations. Finally, he discusses the nuances of the labeling process, part number, and where and how vendor part number should be used to avoid tight coupling with your vendors while still providing end-to-end traceability. Let me introduce Jeff to you. Jeff began his first business shortly after graduating from Schulich. In 2015, he successfully exited from his system integration company and is now in the disruptive phase of his career, where he is developing the next generation of supply chain systems. His companies have been on the Profit 100, CDN Top 100, and the Award of Merit from the Association of Chinese Canadian Entrepreneurs. He is an advisory council member on Schulich's RBC Center of Global Enterprise, a board member of the Markham Sports Hall of Fame, and is the director of education for the Materials Handling Society of Ontario. Jeff holds a BBA, MBA, and a PMM, a professional designation in materials management, and just published his book titled Your Warehouse is Not Your Fridge. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hi, Sam. Glad to be here today.
Okay, and I am so excited to have you. Obviously, the depth of insight that you bring to the table, the experience that you have in the warehouse and inventory space, it's going to be so fascinating for our listeners. Just to kick things off, Jeff, do you want to start with your personal story and your current focus?
Sure. Yeah, I've been in the warehousing business for probably over 25 years ago, and I started actually on the distribution side of things. So I cut my teeth in large DCs. Our first project was a very large liquor storage facility in Ontario. We won a large RFP, and that's where we learned the whole process. Eventually, as my career evolved, I got into manufacturing. And one thing I learned very quickly about manufacturers is that they make things very well, but they don't track them very well. Most manufacturers' mindset is they view inventory in transactional terms. So the whole idea is you get a job, you order the materials, you make the product, and you ship everything out. So you have very few raw materials left over, few finished goods left over, and basically there's no inventory to manage. And that's the mindset of manufacturers. They've grown up basically with a job shop mentality. They've got lean principles and just in time to follow. So as a result, the inventory is seen as you don't want to have a lot of it lying around. But what happens as manufacturers start getting larger, inventory start building up, be it raw materials, be it finished goods, be it work in process goods. You get, customers who give you delivery schedules, and all of a sudden you've got to start ordering a lot of materials because you've got lead times from your suppliers.
Yep.
You've got volume discounts for larger purchases. Yep. And of course, you got to store finished goods to make those delivery schedules. So now you've got inventory, and most manufacturers did not go to school to study inventory management. They studied manufacturing engineering, exactly. Right?
Yeah.
And so that's where we come into play, is that we help manufacturers basically scale their material handling processes so that they can continue to grow. Because what I've seen often is that the biggest impediment to manufacturers growing is their inability to manage their material handling processes, and more specifically their warehouses, because that is often the lagging factor. And all of a sudden, you start having more inventory and more costs. What manufacturers, a lot of them may not realize, but their accountants will tell them, is that there's a carrying cost associated with inventory as much as 30% a year. So if that inventory sits in your shelf for, say, 3-4 years, you've already paid for that inventory twice over.
Yep.
So the key is managing that inventory, ensuring proper inventory turns, and just making sure in general you know where stuff is. I mean, as simple as it sounds, it's not as simple to achieve. And that's our goal, is to really help manufacturers scale their warehouses so that basically the warehousing and their material handling process scale as their business grows.
Okay, amazing. And by the way, MEC, just to recap, I love the bits that you just mentioned that, what manufacturers are really good at making, they are not really good at tracking. That is so true. They are really creative people. They can figure any problems out, but they did not go to school, as you correctly pointed out, to study the inventory. And inventory could be a PhD in itself. And obviously, that has a lot of price tag associated with it. And love the fact that, you mentioned the 30% cost. That is definitely extremely critical. I don't know if a lot of manufacturers understand and track that. So obviously, we are going to get into all of those stories, what we are studying in school and what is happening in the real world. We are going to study all of that. But before we do that, we have one of the standard questions for all of our guests that come on the show. And Jeff, that is going to be your perspective on business growth.
Well, yeah, I mean, business growth is a fundamental process of making sure that you have a proper business model, of course, right?
Yeah.
But the key thing, this might sound trite, is you got to have the right people. And as a business owner, you can't be doing everything yourself.
Yep.
You got to learn to delegate. You got to have processes in place. You got to have procedures, and you got to have good people.
Yep.
And you got to have the systems to basically monitor what they're supposed to do. As they say, you inspect what you expect.
Yep.
And as a result of that, you got to make sure you have good infrastructure. So business growth is critical because it's, for us anyhow, it's critical to retaining and attracting the right talent. No one wants to work for a stagnant company. Yep. Everybody wants to work for a company that's growing. And if it's growing, then there's going to be challenging opportunities, not only for personal growth, but also obviously financial growth as well. So business growth is really critical, and you got to always be pushing for it.
Yeah, I love that perspective, especially the people side of the equation. I don't know how many manufacturers really think that, to be honest, but that is absolutely critical because everybody cares for their own resume. And if the company is not growing, there's no question that, they will not be able to grow with the company as well.
And people like to see their employers investing in new technologies, because that's critical to keeping their skills current, right? And also continuous improvement, not only on their own products, but on their internal processes, and then getting people involved in those discussions as well.
I completely agree. Thank you so much for that perspective. So obviously, we want to get into the stories because, you have spent a lot of time and you have seen how the real world works. And that's what our listeners are most excited about. So obviously, we can invest a lot. Obviously, there is a lot happening in the warehouses space, in the inventory space. Sometimes as a business owner, it gets really confusing for them, where to start, where to begin, where are the real problems that companies are having on a daily basis. So obviously, if they listen to some of these stories from their either competitors or the similar companies that they might have, they can learn something. So do you want to start with some of the pitfalls that you are seeing and describe the business model of these companies, who they are, what kind of challenges they have, and if you have helped them in any way, describe the whole story, what's been that process.
Yeah, sure. And it often begins, I'm going to start from the perspective of ownership.
Yeah.
A business owner who runs a manufacturing company, is a member of a golf club. So they're having lunch together with his buddies. And this is actually a true story. And they start talking about inventory. They start talking about, how many shipments they get a day, and they start comparing notes. And all of a sudden, the business owner finds out that his buddy there is shipping, 100 pallets a day, and they're only shipping, say, 30 pallets a day.
Yeah.
And he goes back to his facility, and he's all upset at his warehouse people. We're only shipping 20, 30 pallets a day, and my buddy down the street is shipping, 50 to 100. So.
Yeah.
And it comes down to fundamentally not understanding the processes that drive their particular warehouse.
Yep.
And when I went in to look at their particular processes, reason why they had a lower shipment rate is because they specialize in packaging and setting up the pallets and the containers that their product goes into in exactly the way the customer wants. So there's a lot of material handling that goes into that, and that slows down the shipping process. Whereas the buddy down the street, he was just shipping standardized cartons and cases. So of course he's going to get a higher production rate. So my point of this story is that you can't necessarily compare yourself to the other guy, right? You've got to look at your own internal processes and understand where there are bottlenecks. Because if you do, in this case, if you streamline too much, you lose the so-called competitive advantage that you have. Because let's say you strip out the ability to customize the packaging and you go to cartons and cases. So now you're shipping, double the amount you used to. You've now lost your competitive advantage, and now you're shipping in units that your customers don't want, right? So the bottom line is that you got to look at what works for you and identify targets and come to those agreements on those targets with your own people. Yes, you can look outside and say, best-in-class companies, for example, have at least 97% inventory accuracy. Yeah. That's a worthy go to target for. Yeah. But again, when you define inventory accuracy, it's really a function of two things. Yeah. It's a function of both quantity accuracy and location accuracy. Yeah. So back to the pitfalls of deciding on getting better inventory, you have to say, okay, the goal has to be improved inventory accuracy, and it's like happiness. You don't wake up one morning and say, I'm going to be happy. Or you're going to wake up one morning, I'm going to have inventory accuracy. It's a function of doing a lot of little things right. So in the case of this company that want to improve their shipment rates, it was more a question of ensuring that they had the identification of where all the products were in the facility itself, so they could quickly bring those products to those areas where they get repackaged, but also being able to batch the jobs so they do it on a more economical level. So if the same customer gave them 2 orders with 2 shipment dates, the question is it better to do the repackaging all on the same date and then hold some for the next delivery, or to do it when the delivery comes, right? And those are the types of internal discussions that need to take place. And to support that process, you need to always have accurate inventory levels. So basically, without that accurate inventory levels, it makes it very hard to say, hey, let's do all that packaging all at once, or let's hold off, right? So being able to have that accurate inventory gives you the flexibility to adapt your processes. So that's why I say it's foundational. And it's also a function of doing a lot of things correct in terms of ensuring that you do have that accurate inventory levels.
Okay, love that story, by the way. We have all seen these random KPIs and they become sort of the driver for the processes. And if you are actually running on the field, to be honest, and let's say if you are managing the system or if you are the warehouse guy, you are obviously going to be so mad that, these KPIs are not really meaningful, to be honest, just because it could be the problem in the inventory accuracy or it could be something else. So obviously each business is going to be unique. Each warehouse is is going to be unique because they are going to have their own product nuances. So you can't simply just go out there and set the KPIs. But let's peel back in the story a bit more. So let's say if you were to create the KPIs for the company, because we all need the KPIs. One of the ways could be, let's say, if you look at your own historical performance and you sort of use that as the driver for your own KPIs. And you did mention that, inventory accuracy is going to be required, but I don't know how many companies can really claim that they really have the 97, 99% accuracy. And the accuracy could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different companies. So I don't know if you're going to have another story in deciding the KPIs and coming up with the inventory accuracy that is really going to be the driver in improvising the process as opposed to picking these random KPIs.
Yeah, sure. So often, it goes back to fundamentally reviewing your processes with your team. So let's focus on a specific process within a company, right? And that's where you typically build your KPIs around. So let's do receiving, for example. So that's a case where raw materials are coming in, or finished goods are coming in that you don't necessarily manufacture, but you may resell. But either way, you've got goods coming in. You need to be updated against a purchase order and then put away. Right. So the whole idea is to develop better metrics around that process. So the first metric you can look at is, how many purchase orders are we receiving?
Okay.
What is the accuracy level of updating those purchase orders, as well as what is the ship accuracy of our suppliers, right? Are they shipping us 100% quantity? Okay. Are they shipping us, damaged goods, etc.? And then finally, on the put away time, how long does it take us to, or I should say, how long does it take us to do the put away? So, you've got this common KPI called dock to stock. And that's a question of when the goods arrive in stock, how long does it take you to put away to the stock, to the warehouse? Okay. So that cycle time should be measured as one of your KPIs, right? And it's all going to be custom for your business. So back to the story around the golf buddies, somebody's dock to stock time, say for a distributor, right, which requires very little handling, maybe an hour. Right? Whereas a manufacturer, when they bring in, say, metal products, or they bring in chemicals, right? I guarantee there's going to be some sort of inspection required. Right? And that inspection may result in the product being held in a certain area. And then people with specialized skills and knowledge will come up and do a test on that product. And then, of course, once the product passes the test, it's going to get a special label put on it. In this case, a stock label, and that tells the material handlers that product can now be moved from this hold area and do a put away. Now, that cycle time may take a day, it may take several hours, right? So it becomes unique. So while you want to improve your dock to stock ratio, the actual number is gonna differ for everybody, right? So that's my point, Sam, is that you start with these high-level best in practice ratios, and then you customize it to suit your own internal processes to take into account all the things that happen when you receive product, right? And there's lots of little tricks you can do as well to help speed up that process. For example, you'll receive product that's pre-barcoded. Your supplier will often have, say, a UPC-A barcode on it, which is what you commonly see in retail stores. They may have their own internal barcode that your supplier may have labeled. And it's very common, I'd say about 60% of products will come pre-labeled for you. Now, the question and the challenge is for you to use those barcodes internally. And most systems have this thing called part alias. So basically what you do is you set it up within your warehouse system or your ERP that this supplier's part number, say 123, is actually equal to my internal part number, which is, say, ABC. So that when you scan that incoming barcode 123, it's automatically translated to ABC. So now that will save you a lot of time because now you don't have to relabel that product. And you're actually scanning a barcode, which is going to improve your accuracy, right? So that's one quick little hack that you can do to improve the speed of receiving it, right? Yeah. Likewise, when they do a put away process, it's also a nice function to have on your inventory system if it has a suggested put away location.
Okay.
Or there's a ability on the driver's part or the material handler's part to be able to do a quick lookup to see what are the available locations in the warehouse to say, okay, here are my available locations. Here's where I can put it. And typically you would want to obviously choose a location where you have an available slot and it's also close to the other identical products. So that way you're not necessarily spreading your product all over the place. And there's also a third trick is that you want to store the product in such a way that allows for automatic turnover of your oldest product, so that this incoming product that gets put away doesn't necessarily get put away in an area that makes it too easy to get picked first.
Yeah.
So you do a put away function. You need to put away ideally in the higher racks.
Yep.
And then do a bit of stock rotation to bring some of the older product down and put it into what we call the lower racks or pick faces. That will make it easy for the material handlers who are pulling materials for production to take it from the lower racks, ideally racks 1 and 2. And you want to store products in 3, 4, and 5, those kind of levels. So there's a bit of internal rotation that happens as well. So the whole idea is that you want to do the receiving and the put away in the most efficient manner possible, but also setting it up for downstream processes so that the guys who are picking those materials for production can do it in an efficient manner. So that's the trick and science and art of not only just receiving something properly and utilizing some existing barcodes from your supplier, and take into account things like inspection, where you come up with your own KPI on the so-called dock to stock measure cycle time. But you also have to take into account some of your own internal processes to ensure, say, proper rotation of that inventory, which allows you to, will reduce the amount of obsolescence and improve your turns of inventory as well.
Okay, amazing. Some great insights there. And I am actually going to peel back a little bit more in terms of your dock to stock and the receiving process, because there's a lot of nuance there. And I have seen a lot of different crazy scenarios when you talk about different industries. So obviously the dock to stock is going to be slightly broader KPIs, but you need to track a lot of KPIs underneath that to be able to get the right dock to stock for your processes. By the way, I have also seen some of the other nuances. For example, you mentioned that the vendor cross reference or the alias that you were mentioning, that you can reutilize these vendor part number. But in your case, what you said is, you have the internal part number and you are getting your vendor cross reference. Now these two are tied together. So you are saying that, you can scan the barcode, and as long as you have that reference in your ERP or WMS system or whatever you might be using, you don't have to relabel this. So now some of the customers, what they do is, I don't know if this is going to be your recommendation or if you can see some of the issues with this or not, but what they do is they are actually going to use the vendor part number as their internal part number. Okay. And that I can see a lot of issues because of that, if you have done that, because now the vendor part numbers are actually driving your processes. So tomorrow, if they are actually going to change their scheme, your system is going to be broken, right? So have you seen any scenarios where the companies started using somebody else's part number because they didn't want to relabel, because that actually increases the effort from your dock to stock processes? So that's why they would use the number, but they actually they literally created the inventory number or the part number in their ERP system. That is somebody else's part number, not your part number.
Yeah, and that's always a challenge, because that vendor part number is, what happens is if you change vendors, right? Like a lot of companies now, because of the shortages and tightness of supply chain, are seeking secondary, even tertiary or third level suppliers, right? So now you've got multiple suppliers, but you're stuck with this original vendor's barcode or part number, say 1, 2, 3, and another vendor's part number is say 124.
Yeah.
And so what you end up doing is you end up creating these 3 different part numbers, all for the same part. So it's always important to have your own internal part number and to actually go through that process of standardizing internally. And also, I'm always a big fan of having a set format of your internal part numbers. And part numbers should be typically anywhere from 5 to 7 digits, some human readable, and a number. Like for example, I'm a big time cyclist. I like to ride bikes, and so if you have an inner tube, right?
Yeah.
You would say make a part number called tub 700, which means inner tube. TUB 700 means the size of the tire. That could be a part number, tub 700. So I'm reading it. I know exactly what that means. Now, that inner tube, I guarantee you, coming from a manufacturer, is probably a UPCA barcode, a 12-digit, makes no sense barcode. Right? And then you could buy that same inner tube from another manufacturer, and it'll have another UPCA barcode on it, right?
Yeah.
So now you're stuck, right? What do you do? So, but if you had your own internal partners, it gives you that flexibility to not only change vendors, right? But it gives your people internally a quick reference by looking at the part, and they know instantly what that part means, right? Whereas if I tried to read your UPCA code, I couldn't tell you what it means at all. So I hope that answers your question, but it's really important at the onset as you grow to move away from using your manufacturer's part numbers, which a lot of manufacturers start out doing because, you know what, they say, let's just use that part number. Purchasing goes, how do I order this part? Just use their part number. We'll make it our own. And that's how it starts.
Yeah.
And then it starts becoming a free-for-all because then the purchasing now will use other manufacturers' partners because that was your early instruction to them. And before you know it, you got all these partners that don't make any sense. And they're also this partner and that partner. So when that purchasing person leaves you, you don't know what to do anymore because you've got this part number under 5 different vendors with 5 different part numbers, and try counting inventory. What are you going to do then, right? You have no idea what they order. So it goes to controlling your own house, and at some point you will have to jump off that practice of using your supplier's barcodes. And I encourage you to do it sooner than later because it's not difficult. And if you have the alias function, then you don't need to relabel. But of course, you may want to put a shelf label out there, which is your own product that will say, back to my example, that will say TUB 700 on it. So that way they know that this part number represents this internal part number here, right? And as well, of course, you can always do a label as well. So if you receive a pallet of product, there's no harm in producing a few labels and putting them on the boxes, which gives the guys a reference point as well. I'm not saying you have to produce a label for every box that comes in, but you could do it on a sporadic basis just to get enough on there on a pallet, so that way the guys know what they're paying. If for example the UPC code of the supplier doesn't give them enough information.
Okay, very interesting. So I'm actually going to do a little bit more peel backing because I see this confusion all the time in my customer base because sometimes they just don't have these answers. So for example, when you say, now we agree that you should not be utilizing supplier's part number as your own part number that is actually driving your internal scheme of things. You should be using the cross-reference or alias that you might have. But when it comes to the actual barcode, and I don't know, you have a lot more experience overall from the importing perspective, and you did mention that, you might not be able to sort of read the barcode because these are a bunch of lines and I don't know what that means. You have some limitations overall in the barcode encoding as well, right? So, and you also mentioned that you can have a bunch of different labels. Now, what is the best practice? Let's say if I am trying to encode, so when the suppliers are actually going to supply, are they going to have 5 different labels? And one of them is going to be the vendor cross-reference. And what is going to be my algorithm when I actually go back to my system? Is it going to be, okay, look up for the vendor part number first, and can you find the alias in your internal system. If you cannot, then probably try to find the inventory number that you may have supplied, because some vendors may not have their part number. So you need to rely on your internal part number as well. So there's always going to be a mix up. So what would be your recommendation overall in terms of what should go on the pallet and what all numbers should go on a pallet, and how the algorithm is going to work when you are actually trying to scan that?
Oh, that's a big question. But yeah, so I mean, yeah, so in terms of barcode symbologies, I mean, that's I'm assuming you're referencing that. I mean, there's code 39, which is the most common barcode out there. And so you would produce a code 39 label, ideally with the obviously the barcode on there, but also the description of the product would be below it, right?
Okay.
And a lot of companies use a 4x6 white label or a 2x4 label that's adequate. And what we encourage companies to do is that if your supplier has barcodes on the product, is to first set up the part alias function. Obviously, test to make sure the barcode is scannable in the first place. You'd be surprised how many people slap a barcode on a product and the barcode isn't readable at all.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. And then decide how you can incorporate, can you use their particular vendor part number internally, right? And this is where you need to do training with your people at who are doing the receiving, and so that they know for specific types of product coming in, when to use the existing supplier's barcode and when to not, right? For situations where you won't be able to use the existing supplier's part number, because maybe for whatever reason that part number is already used elsewhere. There's or it's just easier to relabel the product. If you decide to relabel, where you want to put the label is ideally at the bottom of the pallet. So basically, when you're pulling product from the pallet itself, most people obviously pull from the top. Yeah. So you always have the product label on the bottom of the pallet, and now you encourage them to do labels at the corners of the boxes of the pallet on all sides. So you're producing anywhere from 2 to 4 labels that you put at the bottom of the pallet, and that becomes the barcode that they would scan when they're picking product out of the rack for that product, right? So what's critical is making sure that you come up with a proper, what we call part description, as well as a part nomenclature, which back to my Tub 700, that kind of structure.
Yeah.
And then instructing guys where to label the product, right? And then deciding which of the barcodes that you're going to use from your suppliers, right? Ideally, more the better. And there's also things I want to bring in like trace. There's manufacturers will be receiving metals and chemicals and all sorts of product, and there'll be trace information on it, such as lot number, such as heat number, right? Even serialized product will come in. So the question becomes, can you use that trace information internally? And I encourage our suppliers or our customers to use that trace information internally, so that if there ever is a recall, it's an easy lookup. So your suppliers would say, oh, that last batch I sent you, lot 1, 2, 3, it's no good, pull it off. So hopefully you're using that trace information internally, so it's very easy to do a lookup and to pull lot 1, 2, 3 off your shelf. So that gets to my second thing, is you will need to also look at barcoding a trace ID on there, right? So creating a specific barcode that's related to the trace elements associated with that incoming product. And that's where you would have to produce your own label, because a lot of suppliers that we've seen don't typically barcode their lot numbers or their serial numbers or their best before dates. So that's where internally you may need to reproduce your own label, particularly if you want trace information on there. And that trace information is really critical if you want to do, say, an inventory count.
Yeah.
If you want to support FIFO, first in, first out picking, because you want to base it on trace ID. And lastly, for issuing. A lot of manufacturers will want to issue and track the specific lot numbers that they've issued to the job, right? So you need to have that all barcode. And again, having that barcode will make your downstream processes more efficient. It's just all a question of putting it on the label, receiving. So again, that goes to, that will affect naturally your dock to stock ratio, but that gets all taken into account, so that such that, you may say, our dock to stock ratio or dock to stock target is say 1 hour. When the product arrives, we want to put away within the hour time, and that time is easy to track. We had a customer who the warehouse manager, his biggest function every day was checking to make sure that the products that got put away in the right location, with the right label on it, and in the right quantity. That's what he did. He would walk around every day at the end of the day to make sure these guys were doing receiving properly. He wasted, well, I wouldn't say wasted, but it probably took him up to several hours a day. And once they put in our system and they did all those steps I described, he no longer worried about it. And their inventory accuracy went up from, in his view, from the low 60s to well over 95, 97%. So he started developing a lot more confidence such that, it freed up several hours in his day. So the receiving function is really important, and do that correctly. So back to the dock to stock is that it's got to be customized to suit your own internal processes, which would include all the things we talked about today.
Okay, amazing. So that's it for today, Jeff. Do you have any last minute closing thoughts or remarks for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, the process of improving inventory accuracy and improving your confidence in your inventory is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And you need to have top level support and a vision for getting there. So it's done in a series of small little steps or wins. And a lot of companies approach it from the viewpoint of, I'm going to do this now and then move on to the next project. But in reality, barcoding and inventory management is a continuous improvement process, and it should be seen as that, no different than your manufacturing processes. So take the attitude that it's a long haul, it's a journey, and you start with the first step. Okay, amazing. I love that perspective, by the way. And my personal takeaway from the conversation is going to be, obviously, it is going to be the continuous journey when you are looking at improvising your warehouse or inventory function. You can always improve more there. Going back to your comment about the 30% carrying cost just because of the inventory, you have a lot of opportunities right there. And I don't know if a lot of manufacturers realize that. So make sure you are going to be number one, considering this as the continuous journey, but do not try to compare your metric with somebody else because that's their business and this is your business. On that note, Jeff, I really want to thank you for your time. This has been a powerful episode. Thanks very much, Sam. Always a pleasure. I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Jeff, head over to portable-intelligence.com. It's portable-intelligence.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Kevin Paramore, who discusses the nuances of robotic automation of warehouse and manufacturing processes. Also, the interview with John Schechter, who outlines how mobile ASRS systems differ from the regular ones. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.